All right, tell us a little bit about your early life, Bill.
Well, I was born in Utica and lived in Utica till I was about 5 years old. Started school in Utica. Went to kindergarten at Our Lady of Lourdes, and then my family moved to Barneveld, and I was a kindergarten dropout. So they had a beautiful new kindergarten in Holland Patton School, so my father and mother thought that'd be good. I was probably premature anyways or something, but they took me to Holland Patton after, and went to kindergarten through 7th grade there. Uh, we moved to Barneveld. The first person I met was my neighbor, Bob Collins. He had the Craig Manor Farm. I went up to Bob's house and met. My mother saw him out playing, so she took me up there. And apparently I had knickers. And Bob never forgot. Cute little Billy with his sailor suit or something. He wouldn't let me forget that. Bob and I had a lot of things. We made maple syrup. We had a little chicken coop behind our house, and we burnt that down. Uh, then I went through school. After that, my folks moved to Utica. We were only there about 12 years, or less. And I went to parochial school, St. Francis de Sales, to improve my behavior, which certainly he did a lot to help me along the way. That's about all.
I understand that your mom ran the switchboard in Barneveld.
Well, she worked there part-time. Uh, it was a small switchboard in our house. Our telephone number is 41J, and you'd pick it up, you'd crank it, and the operator would get on and say, "Number, please." So that would be my mother. And you say, "Well, I want 81." And she said, "Well, they're not home. They've gone to Rome." So the operator knew everything's going on in Barneveld. Also, you would call them if there was a fire. And they had to get up and put a disc in the alarm system, and the firemen would know if it was one long and two shorts, it was to the west, and it had a lot of different signals. The firemen would know which way to start. One time, my dad and I were working what we called a victory garden up on the hill behind our house. We had a little garden, and most people had them during the World War II. And we looked up, and Collins' barn was glowing red. So Dad said, "Billy, go tell Mom to call the fire department." He took off to go help them get the cows out and stuff. I'll never forget that. That's my dad. He worked his whole life as a crane operator at the Barge Canal Harbor. It was on tracks. It was a steam locomotive engine, and he was going to quit. And I've got a letter at home saying his boss wrote to Albany saying if he didn't get $1 an hour, he was going to leave the canal service. So the man said in the letter, said, "He's a valued employee. He's probably worth at least $1.25." And he must have gotten it because it's the only job he ever had.
I understand that cars don't behave well occasionally around you.
Well, when I was running a gas station on the corner of Noyes and York Street in Utica, I drove down to the bank and to make a deposit, parked the car outside the bank. This is before they had drive-in tellers. And went in the bank, did my business, and came out, and my car wasn't where I'd parked it. I looked around, oh my God, there was a crowd standing in front of this bridal shop, and my car had backed across the street and into the bridal shop. It would start itself up once in a while. Another time, I had it parked, and bumped into some people's house. That was a nice car. I liked it a lot. A friend of mine bought it though, and I never saw it again. He rolled it over. He gave me $75 for it, and everything was fine.
It sounded like the car had a mind of its own, kind of like its owner.
Yeah.
I understand when you were 16 years old, you worked in the nut house. How was it working in Marcy Psychiatric?
Oh no, it wasn't Marcy Psychiatric. It was Morrow's Nut House on Genesee Street in Utica, where he sold roasted nuts, peanuts, filberts, pistachios, all the different nuts, and I was a stock boy. I had to go down cellar, bring up the tins of nuts, and upstairs, Betty Jewell used to make the peanut clusters. And I'd go up to see Betty quite a bit, and she was awful nice to me. She'd give me a few peanut clusters, and I'd get back to work. One of my big jobs there was washing the windows on the outside. I always had to do that no matter how cold it was. Dorothy Hogblum was our manager, and Mrs. Hogblum would say, "You wash those windows, if it freezes up, put a little more alcohol in the water so it won't freeze." After I gave that job up, a friend of mine, Jim Denton, took over after me, and I went to work in the gas station. Jim Denton, he worked there. He turned out to be a Catholic priest, still a good friend of mine. He's out in South Bend, Indiana now. So I worked in the gas station until I got out of high school and went in the Army for 2 years. In the Army, I went to basic training, then they sent me to cook and baker school. So I didn't have to go on to advanced infantry. I was second in my class in cook and baker school. So they sent me to Arkansas and then to Texas. I was first baker in the battalion mess hall. Then they ran out of MPs, so they took a bunch of us cooks, because they had too many of us, and made us MPs. So the rest of my career was an MP in the Army.
All right, so you got history with nuts and cakes, and then you became an MP.
Yeah.
All right.
Then when I got out, actually my first job when I got out of the Army, I was working for Andy Zampier here at the bakery in Barneveld. And that was short-lived because Andy liked to start about 5 in the morning in the bakery, and I thought that's what time you went home. I didn't think he'd get up at 5, so after about 2 weeks, Andy and I had a good chat, and he thought that I wasn't cut out for that work.
And then when did you own a gas station in Barneveld?
Well, I never had. I worked for Glenn Haskell in the gas station in that same building. In that building, I worked for Andy's Bakery, and then for George Ralph and Ronnie Jones for Flavor Test Ice Cream. I also worked for Glenn Haskell in his garage. I would take cars apart and then go get Glenn to help me put them back together.
When did you meet your wife?
Well, I knew her for a long time. I met her brother and sister first. We were all at St. Francis de Sales. Her brother's my real good friend, and he still is. And I dated her sister, took her to junior prom. I have a picture of that. And looks like Suzanne and I, but it was Janet and I. And Janet dumped me, and all of a sudden, that little runny-nosed kid that used to hang around there grew up to be a beautiful girl. I noticed her, asked her if she'd go out, and she and I got married. She was teaching actually in Long Island, her first job, but then we got married at Trinkus Manor. It was a beautiful place. We had the Manhattan Fountain and a whiskey sour fountain. It was nice. We had a great time. It was a real nice wedding. We have pictures of that somewhere.
Who was your best man?
My brother Ed was my best man. Suzanne's brother Jim Meyer was in the wedding. Tommy Nickness, Bob McGaw. Yeah, 4 or 5 guys.
How did the Hinge clan end up in Barneveld?
Well, my sister never left Barneveld. She got married Glenn Haskell, and the reception was right at our home in our yard in Barneveld. And so Betty stayed in Barneveld. Ed and I moved with my folks after a little while after that to Deerfield. Went to school. Ed finished school in Patton, and I finished school in Utica. But Ed moved up here. He built a house and moved up here right shortly after he's married. I guess he had a couple of children then. And then I'd always wanted to get back to Barneveld. I heard about this old abandoned building up there. Actually, Chris Kelly had told me he'd bought an old abandoned church in Patton, was fixing it up. So I knew where there was an abandoned church in Barneveld, so we talked to the people and they sold it to us. I think it was $10,000.
All right, you moved back to Barneveld around 1970. Who were some of the characters in the village then?
Well, I can't remember the names. One fellow lived in a little house. It was like I don't know, probably was a little gas station one time by Van Stavern. He crashed into my building. He made like a U-turn or something. I don't know what. He crashed right in the front of his hardware store, knocked the door in and some windows. Later on, then he lost his license, so he used to ride around town with his riding lawnmower. He had a whip antenna on the back, and that was one fella. And there was Charlie Santee. He was always dressed up in an old Civil War outfit. And Charlie was a good guy. He worked at the Square Stamp. Another fellow, I can't think of his name. He was a character. He used to drive around in his car with the windows rolled up, make people think he had air conditioning. He'd buy a quart of paint every year to paint his car. And there's Mark Schreiner. He also repaired shoes, and he did upholstery work too. He did an upholstery, did one of our chairs one time. Did a real good job. It was Mark. There were not too many characters. Bicycle Charlie, he'd come riding his bike into town, and he'd go to the hotel more, have a couple of drinks, and walk across the street to the Old Bank Tavern, have a couple of drinks there. He always had candy in his pocket, gave candy or gum to the kids. He was harmless, a real nice guy. He worked on one of the farms. And then there's Willie Swap. He used to come to the ball games. He came to town to stay a week and never left. Willie Swap, oh golly. There are a lot of characters around. I can't remember them.
What was the Park Avenue Aquatica Society?
That was the water tub in Barneveld. We looked to have pictures of the water tub. It's kind of our landmark. On a hot summer day, the water was always cold in there, quite cold. And because it ran from underground continuously. And if you sat in there in your lawn chair for a few minutes, and of course you'd have a couple cocktails before and one while you're sitting there, then you became a member of the Park Aquatic Society. That was the water tub. Sid Burge was the first one to do that, and later on I know Fred Schultz, and I remember doing it myself, and a few others. That was a lot of fun.
I understand you moved into your house and it needed some work.
Well, it needed a considerable amount of work. It had been used as a meeting house and it was used for church suppers, so they had running water, and then a very short time a refugee family, George Walesko and his parents lived there, but that was just a short time. They rented it, I think. So it didn't have any kitchen. It had nice windowsills, so that Suzanne had a 2-burner hot plate on the windowsill, and all the kids slept in one room on one side. Then we fixed up the other side, leveled up the floors, and made a kitchen. I was the first one in Barneveld to have side-by-side refrigerator. They called them side-by-sides. Now, what I had was a refrigerator on one side for food and one side for beer. And we fixed that house up, and Made a real nice home out of it and stayed there for 48 years.
And was the second floor, you had to cut it, didn't you? You had to.
We lowered the ceiling on the second floor. It was a big dome ceiling, it's still in there, but we dropped that about probably 4 foot in the middle, and opened up part of it took out part of the floor and made a balcony out of a large area, and made 5 bedrooms and 2 full baths.
And that one room that had the old metal bathtub where the actors and actresses used to change, that was a interesting fact.
That room was very neat. They used to put on plays there, church groups, came from Lee Center, and some from Steuben, some from down in Frankfurt. They come and put on plays. One play was The Path Across the Hill, and I had the program for that. And I knew several people that was actually in there: Paul Barker, Carrie Barker, Ab Mallory, Stark Mallory, Mary Williams, and was Mary, was Elaine Warkup's mother. Those people were in the play, and I knew them when they were older. And then, for a short time, the Ku Klux Klan would meet in there until Buck Stockhauser, he was a highway commissioner, and he was a kind of a gentleman but a tough guy at the same time, and he always carried a pistol. So he went in there one time when he said, "You cowards, take off your mask or I'm going to start shooting." So that was the end of the Ku Klux Klan. But they signed that in that room upstairs, and those signatures are still there. And one side of the wall is KKK, and a lot of people in the plays would sign their name on there. So I never touched that.
When you moved into the house, they had a lead cistern up in the attic, where they collected water. Can you tell us a little more about that?
Well, they collected rainwater and used that for, I guess, bathing and dishes and cooking. But spring water, I don't remember where they got that, because that was at the time we moved into WPA. That was a program started by President Roosevelt. WPA was digging the ditches and putting in the water lines. It was all done by hand, and they ran, actually our pipes in the village are made of asbestos. So, but it never hurt anybody drinking out of asbestos pipe, as long as you didn't swallow all, get drowned, I guess, in the water, but never bothered anybody. So then we got running water, which is a real fine water system. Over the years, it's had many improvements. I worked on it a lot myself. It would spring a leak, we'd have to go tramp through the fields and for about 2 miles of pipe, try and find a leak, and it would always come to the surface eventually, and that's where we'd get the machine up there to dig, and it'd be a coupling. And they still have the same, they call it pipe transite. It runs from the springs up near Prospect to a tub up on the hill by the cemetery and down in the village, where we have excellent water and great pressure. Since we put in more, we've added from time to time whatever the state demanded. So we have, I think, number 1 or number 2 rural water system in the state of New York.
When I first moved into my house in Barneveld, I was doing some work on it. I came down to your hardware store in the middle of town, and I got a 5-gallon bucket of joint compound. And I didn't have the $5 that it cost for the bucket, so I said, "Here, will you take a credit card?" And you said, "Oh, well, we don't want to do that because the credit card companies get some of that money, so why don't you just take the bucket and come back later on when you have the money." Do you have any stories like that of people when you moved into Barneveld that you remember?
Well, everybody was so good to us. Of course, moving into that old abandoned church, they wondered what kind of goofy people they were. But everybody's good. We'd go down and grocery store, we could charge our groceries. You go to the hardware store, have a charge account. Go to the gas station, George Roberts, have a hard charge there. So you go around town, you didn't even need money. And then when you had money, you settled up with them. Everybody worked like that. Many people were always good to us, and because we were the odd ones in town, I think that we got to know people. But from my childhood, I used to hang around that hardware store, and I always liked it. And I was doing plumbing and heating work around Barneveld. I used to go in the store a lot, and I still have a half-inch drill that I bought there. And I would kid Paul Barker, he wanted to sell it, and I'd say, Paul, you got somebody looking for it? And he'd, no, Bill, somebody's here, but then one day I walked in there, and he said to me, Bill, I think I have somebody interested in the store. So then I got thinking, gee, I want that place. And went to my brother-in-law, John Durant, he co-signed with me, and we bought the business. Then later on, I bought his share out. But people were always good to us in Barneveld. I hate leaving here, but that big house is a little bit too big for 2 people. We didn't need 5 bedrooms anymore. We've settled in a nice little home in Poland, only 7 miles away. We still have our Barneveld address. They come to Barneveld to pick up my mail, and they see me getting out of my car. Sometimes they bring the mail out to me. They're very, very nice people.
I think if you have people do things for you, then you pass it on later. Like one of my favorite stories to tell people about village life is that time I was working on my plumbing, and I was working pretty hard. I kept coming into this was when you were in the barn on Route 12. Kept coming in the hardware store. I'd get this and that, and you were going away for the weekend, and you knew I was going to need to be coming in for things, and you just gave me the key to the hardware store, and you said we'd settle up later. And I use that story because nowadays with the big box stores, I'm thinking, when does that ever happen? So that really is just like the greatest thing about living in a small town.
Yeah, well, when I had the hardware store in the village, and Arnold Allen had this grocery store across the street, we each had keys to the other store. I could go in on a Sunday and get a steak out of the cooler or something, just make a note, and Arnold, I bought such and such, I'll be in Monday to pay for it. That was the way we used to do business. I'd go down to George Roberts' gas station, the muffler's falling off, he'd put some wire on it and tie it up for me. He said, you'll be all right, Bill. Keep going.
Well, the sad thing is now, I don't know the people in the village like we used to. And
when I was a kid, as a paper boy, knew all of them. But I can tell you who lived in all those houses, McIntosh and Jepson and the different ones that lived in the houses in Barneveld when I was a kid. But I've lost track of a lot of them. Of course, growing old and not having kids in school, you lose track of them. But, so we've just had a wonderful time in Barneveld. People have been good to us. We've enjoyed it. We tried to give back. So, off we are.